So the goal of this lecture is to introduce you to another group of eukaryotes, and those are the fungi. So just once again, these fungi can be multicellular or single cellular. So we can see, for example, the mushroom all the way on the left. This is a multicellular example of fungi, while the yeast in the middle picture are an example of unicellular fungi. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about their phylogenetic places on the tree of life, as well as some of their characteristics. So if we look at this phylogenetic tree here, you can see that we have this relationship where fungi are more closely related to animals than they are to plants. And so if you look, the brown colored words right here, those are represented by are the fungi, and then you can see that animals represent that outgroup right there. While the plants are in the green at the bottom, you can see are not included in that clade. So this is based on DNA evidence, but there is also morphological evidence as well that links these traits together. So we're going to talk about these pieces of morphological evidence. The first is that both fungi and animals synthesize a material called chitin. So chitin is found in the exoskeletons of arthropods, so crabs, lobsters, and then of course like insects have this, that tough exoskeleton, and that's composed of chitin. That chitin is also a major component of the cell walls in fungi. So we've seen multiple examples of cell walls. So plants have cell walls made of cellulose. There are protists that have cell walls, and they have different types of cell walls. And then we see cell walls in bacteria and archaea, but remember that in the bacteria they're made of peptidoglycan. So in fungi we have cell walls, and we can see that here they're made of chitin. So the fact that fungi and animals have chitin helps to show this close relationship through this morphological trait. Another morphological trait that they share are the presence of flagella. So there are some fungi that have flagella. These are called the chytrid fungi, and you might have heard of these before. They're thought to have caused some amphibian deaths throughout the world. So they're an infectious fungi. And so their flagella, which you can see a picture here on the right, their flagella are very similar to those found in the flagella of, for example, the sperm of animals. And so they have similarity in their flagellar structure as well. And then finally, the last thing that they have in common is that they both use glycogen as their storage molecule. So for example, plants use starch to store like excess sugars, while animals and fungi are using glycogen to store excess sugars. So not only do we have the DNA evidence linking them together, but we have these three morphological pieces. So once again, similarity, they both produce chitin, they have similarity in flagella structure, and they use glycogen to store sugars. And so because of this close phylogenetic relationship between animals and fungi, this can help make treating fungal infections very hard because they're eukaryotes, so we can't utilize, for example, like we do in bacteria, we can't utilize like antibiotics that stop their ribosomes, because their ribosomes are just like ours. They have very similar, similar DNA structure. We have these similar morphological features, and so this can make fungal infections really hard to treat. So now we're just going to briefly touch on some other characteristics that help to distinguish fungi and their some of their unique traits that they possess. So they come in two forms. I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture that they can be unicellular or multicellular. And so the unicellular forms are called yeast. And so once again, you can see that on the left in this image here. There's also a multicellular form that's very filamentous, so sort of think of it as very stringy. And these forms are called mycelia. So these mycelia are really important because fungi are heterotrophs. So heterotrophs are organisms that have to that either eat food or absorb it from their environment. So for example, bacteria are heterotrophs, animals are heterotrophs, so you'll learn about that in class. Plants, on the other hand, are autotrophs, so they perform photosynthesis to get their food. And then protists, there's a mix of heterotrophs and autotrophs. But fungi are all heterotrophs, and so they actually absorb their nutrients from their environment. And so these mycelia, what they do is they go into the environment, and when the fungi encounter something that they can absorb as food, what they do is they release this external component of enzymes. Those enzymes break down that matter, and then they are able to absorb that broken down matter through these mycelia. There are special little structures called hyphae that help to absorb the broken down material. And so, for example, I've had seen this in my own yard. We had these tree stumps, and they had these little shelf fungi that grew on them. And it's really cool because you can, like, over time, the tree became very, very soft, and you could easily just sort of poke it with a stick and it would fall apart. And it's because these fungi had all their mycelia growing in through the wood and breaking it down. So they're natural decomposers in an ecosystem. And so once again, they release those external enzymes, they break down the material that they're growing through, and then they are able to absorb nutrients. And actually, fungi are some of the only organisms that can actually break down wood. And so those mycelia are constantly growing in the direction of where there are food sources. And then when there's not any food sources, they sort of die back. And so if you were to look at the mycelia, if you zoom in on them, you would see that there are a bunch of these little branching strings composing the mycelia, and those are called the hyphae. And so these are these long branching filaments that help to increase a surface area for absorption of nutrients. And so they branch very frequently, and that frequent branching creates more surface area. And so what's really cool is that these mycelia, because they're so tiny, sort of think of them as like as tiny little fine hairs growing through the soil, they can actually access areas of the soil that plant roots can't. Plant roots tend to be a lot larger than mycelia, and so they're able to sort of go in and access areas that plant roots can't and find food that way. And so these complex networks of hyphae, so this is actually showing you, if you look at this image here, this is the branching that you can observe in 1 square millimeter if you were to look at those hyphae under a microscope. So it's pretty amazing. And so this creates what we call a high surface area to volume ratio. And that's really something that you want when you are doing absorption. You want you want a lot of branching and surface area to be created in order to contact more of, for example, the soil, in order to look for those nutrients to absorb them. And so they are some of the best organisms at absorbing nutrients. Now, this can cause a problem because if you have all of these nutrients in this large surface area that you're trying to cover with this high branching, you expose more of yourself to the environment. And so as a result, you have a higher risk of drying out. And so that's usually why we see fungi growing in moist areas. And then finally, what we see here is that there are reproductive structures. So not only do we have these sort of absorptive pieces, but we also see reproductive organs. So, for example, the cap of a mushroom. So if you flip over the cap, you see all those little gills. Embedded in those gills are little areas where they have spores, and so these spores are going to be able to be distributed, fall on land, and produce other fungi. And so what you actually eat on a mushroom, if you eat the mushroom caps, those are actually the reproductive structures of the mushroom. Okay, so this is just a brief overview of fungi. And once again, they are heterotrophs that absorb their food from the environment, and they are more closely related to animals than they are to plants. And so you'll need to use some of this information to help you answer the homework that is covering fungi and animals.